In this episode of Doorstep Adventure, we get on the bike and go exploring the National Cycle Route number 5, in and around the Chilterns and The Ridgeway.
Oxfordshire at its best.
We discover an Indian legacy and a gold elephant in the corner of Oxfordshire. We go in search of coffee and cake and find a great cafe on the River Thames. This stunning ride explores some of the National Cycle Network, route number 5. We meander over the side of the Ridgeway and in and around the Chilterns in South Oxfordshire. This 65-kilometre ride starts out near Abingdon and heads out over the River Thames through Wallingford before heading up to Ipsden, over the Ridgeway towards Stoke Row, where we stop in for a short break before heading north up towards Park Corner and the highest spot of the ride at 761 feet. The Waterfront Cafe at Benson offers the perfect spot for coffee and cake before we mount our bikes and continue back home. It's not far back through Berwick, Salome and Stadhampton before we find ourselves back over the Thames and to the Culham Lock where we started. Allow between 3 and 4 hours for this ride depending on how much you want to stop. So before we tackle the Ridgeway and get into the Chilterns where it gets more hilly, I warm up by heading up over the Whittenham Clumps just to check my legs. The Whittenham Clumps is over 390 feet high and consists of Round Hill and Castle Hill, which was the site of an old Iron Age fort, and it's a great place to see the whole of this ride right out in front of you before you get really stuck into it. Cycling over the top of the Whittenham Clumps is a real treat and a chance to see a really great cycle route, and it just urges you to want to get stuck in and explore a little bit more. Coming down the Whittenham Clumps is great and you can get up a real turn of speed, but just go easy on the corners and watch out for a few little bits of loose road and potholes. So at the bottom of the clumps we turn left and we head out towards Wallingford, and you can see behind there's a great vista as the open countryside is clear all the way back to the Ridgeway. Next we turn out onto the main road for just a short stretch before we head back off on the National Cycle Route, which is signposted on the right through Brightwell-cum-Sotwell, and this avoids the traffic as we come into Wallingford. Brightwell-cum-Sotwell is a lovely quiet village for cycling through, with not much more than a little pub and a few houses, but just watch out for a few of the potholes as we're coming round the corner out the village. Turning right out of Brightwell-cum-Sotwell, we follow the main road down towards Wallingford, where we can cycle along the cycle lane all the way through the town. Keep your eyes open on the right and you might spot the new seafood restaurant, Shellfish Cow, which has to be one of the best restaurant names I've ever come across. Wallingford's a lovely market town on the Thames. It's got loads of great restaurants and cafes. There's also a bike shop if you need to stop in and get any stuff for the bike. The road's not in the best condition as we bump along towards the bridge and the river, but here's a good place to stop for a pint by the River Thames if you fancy it. The first mention of this bridge in the history books goes way back to 1141, and the history of this bridge and the town of Wallingford is interwoven with the history of England and Oliver Cromwell and William the Conqueror and all these famous people that we all know about. Crossings over the Thames have always been and remain few and far between, and it's perhaps no surprise that this bridge has been so important in the history books. For me though, and the other cyclists around here, it just represents the best way to get to the Chilterns. It was at this point on my ride that I looked down and noticed that my garmin had gone flat, and I was left thinking, how am I going to navigate the rest of the route? Lucky for me, this was the place where I saw one of the National Cycle Network signs and knew which way I was going to go. At the end of Crowmarsh Gifford, the National Cycle Network route number 5 sign sends you down Meadow Lane, which is a really good place to cross the 4074. Going up Cox's Lane, you start to get the first indication that the countryside is changing. There's a few more trees up here and there's a nice hill, and this is where, when you get to the top, you're given your first full view of what lies ahead. If you're like me, this is probably the first place where you might feel a little bit out of breath.
So I suppose on the positive,
Although the garmin has gone kaput, we are on the national cycle route, and there are some signs. And if you've seen the previous film with bits of this, you'll recognise some of this here. Absolutely beautiful. Looking out towards the Chilterns, where you can see there's a bit more woodland and a bit less farmland, and it all starts to turn into that lovely sort of countryside you only really get in the Chilterns. And probably a good idea sometimes for longer rides to have a backup, either a buddy who's got a GPS as well, or maybe stick it onto your phone as well. I unfortunately didn't think of doing that today, so I'm going to be winging it and hoping we can remember the way around. Isn't that just stunning? Absolutely beautiful. Oxfordshire at its best. As we cross the top of the Ridgeway, we're going through the sort of undulating downland that you see all the way along the Ridgeway. The Ridgeway itself is 87 miles long. Travelling the length of the Ridgeway by foot or on bike is a fantastic journey in its own right and takes you through ancient woodlands and all kinds of different countryside. You can see in the video how beautiful, straight and smooth this road is, and as we start to go downhill you can build up some great speed. But in this part of the world it's never long until you hit the next hill. The next one takes you further up onto the Ridgeway and towards the village of Ipston. And when you get to the top you suddenly realise you're in the middle of nowhere, and it's beautiful and quiet. Just listen to that. Dog, distance, birds. After absorbing the magical sounds on the top of the Ridgeway, I get back on the bike and keep on going. As we meander through these quiet country lanes, all the time looking out for the little blue signs of the national cycle route, but more using my nose to really sense which way I want to go. And it feels like if I head in towards the Chilterns I'm going in the right direction, but at some point we've got to swing up to the north, and that's going to be the way that we're going to loop back up to get back home again at the end of this ride. But isn't this really what it's all about? Just going where your nose takes you. And as I look ahead on the ride, I've got the first sense that I'm about to enter the Chilterns. And suddenly we're under the cover of trees and it's closed in. Little footpaths off the side, little hill, and we're in deepest, darkest nowhere, it feels like. Then no sooner have we been surrounded by the trees, but it starts to clear again, and you're into some lovely open woodland on the tops of the hills. Some of the road on this film perhaps looks a bit muddy and bumpy, but actually it's perfectly fine, and it's worse on the video than it actually is. You get a sense just looking back that we've climbed a decent way up this little hill, and we're easily above the Whitlam clumps now. Way up in the background, though you probably can't see it in the haze. And we're still climbing, and I guess this is probably a section of the Ridgeway, so we're just crossing over here. A little sign there, Chiltern Way Extension, Keeper's Cottage, the Blue Tin Produce Farm Shop. It's advertising coffee and cake, which sounds really tempting, but it doesn't look like it's particularly open at the moment. Nothing more than the chickens to welcome us. Let's keep going. At this time of year, the sun is low on the trees and you get some fantastic light shining through the woodland. I guess it shouldn't really be a surprise if I just tell you the signpost were signposted to Checkenden via Quiet Lane, and it certainly is that. And you're not going to see much down here by way of people or traffic, just trees and wildlife, possibly a few horses. So as we pass through these magnificent old beech woods, we're starting to get down towards Stoke Row. So this is the point of the ride where I'm going to start heading off the National Cycle Route and back out to the north. But before we do that, we're just going to take a little detour down to the Maharajah's well, should I say, and just show you what that's like. So here we are. His Highness the Maharajah of Benares, 1864. And this is a place I normally just come and cycle straight by. It's a bit of an oddity. It's in a small village, just on the edge of Chilterns, Stoke Row. And yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a landmark, really, I suppose. Let's see if we can find out a bit about it. See what we can learn. So the origin of the well lay in the friendship between the East India Company official and the local squire, Edward Anderton Reed, and the Maharajah of Benares, Ishri Prasad. The Maharajah was much intrigued by Reed's tales of the miserable conditions of the poor back in the Chilterns. Reed described the impact of the limited access to clean water. As a result, the Maharajah provided the funds to pay for a well for the villagers. Work began on the project on the foundation day on the 10th of March 1863, the day of the Prince of Wales' royal marriage. Indeed, in the immediate aftermath of the Indian Rebellion, the well was not just a gift to the people of Stoke Row, but also a symbol of loyalty by the Maharajah to Queen Victoria. The well was completed a year later, 1864, and the following year provided with a grand canopy whose unique Anglo-Indian architecture was based on the pavilion in the Maharajah's palace. The golden elephant was added in circa 1871. Key facts. The well canopy stands some 23 feet high, but the real engineering feat is that the well shaft, dug by hand by one man at a time, is some 368 feet down to the waterline. 368 feet? That is mad. That is crazy. Down to the waterline, that is deeper than St Paul's Cathedral is high. Earth was removed bucket by bucket amidst poor light and foul air. If the bucket had fallen, it would have spelt disaster for the subterranean labourer. The well remained in use as a utility as late as the Second World War. And there you have it. I suppose there's some irony about the Maharajah's well, really. You know, these days I read a lot about projects to fund water and sanitation in the developing parts of India. And there it is back in the day in the absolute reverse. And I guess you wouldn't think it. An Indian Maharaja was taking some pity on the sanitation in a lovely little village in England. As I cycled away, I couldn't help but think about that guy, 368 feet down a well, digging away. It's astonishing how deep that well is. The Whitnam clumps at 390 feet is only a little bit more, and they seem huge when you're next to them. So at the Maharajah's well, we turned back on ourselves and started heading back up north towards Nuffield and then Park Corner, just to the northwest of Nettlebed. Then at Cookley Green, we turn west and start heading back in the direction of home. Cookley Green is lovely at this time of the year. Snowdrops on the verges and the daffodils starting to poke through. Spring is certainly just round the corner. And then as we head further to the west, back through the woodlands, we're coming back towards the Ridgeway where we'll cross it once more.
It's the Ridgeway.
I don't know why, but I always like to stop at the top of the Ridgeway and just sort of reflect for a moment and take it all in. There's not much up here. You'll see some sheep, maybe an odd Land Rover and a farmer, and maybe a few walkers coming along the Ridgeway itself. But it's just a lovely spot and worth savouring. From the top of the Ridgeway, you really fly down. Gradually, the land starts to flatten off and the countryside opens out. Ahead in a couple of K, we'll come into the lovely village of Ulm. Ulm's a pretty small village. I think there's only about 1,000 people living there, but it's lovely. It's got these sort of brooks that flow down the side of the streets. Ulm has a lovely little community shop and a pub, and you'll often see cyclists sat outside enjoying the sunshine and a cup of coffee. The stream at the side of the street flows down the village into the watercress beds at the bottom.
Isn't that beautiful?
And as you leave the watercress beds behind you, you continue to follow the brook and it joins into Benson. And there's loads of things there, shops and pubs, and it's a nice place. And the best thing about it is the cafe on the waterfront on the River Thames, where we stopped for cake and refueled ourselves before heading back. The Thames has burst its banks just after Stadhampton, and it's not really very good by bike at the moment, and that's why we took a different route. We came across the bridge at Shillingford and past the pub there, and then past the vineyard at Brightwell. Both nice places to stop, I reckon, on another day. From there our detour took us back through Wallingford, and it's actually a pretty nice way to come back too. There's crocuses out and snowdrops, and it's all lovely at this time of year. But then we went round the side of the Whitnham clumps and then onwards through Appleford to get back to the start.
Getting even lower in the sky. I think I could say we found our way on the way home. We're back on the National Cycle Route number 5 and come through Wallingford. We're heading back over in the direction of the Whitnham clumps, having an absolutely beautiful ride and a new one for me. Not looking at the Garmin, following my nose, trying to remember the landmarks and things that I picked out on the OS map back at home. And we've gone a bit slower as a result. Head hasn't been down quite so much looking at the Garmin. So it's made for a really beautiful ride. And yeah, maybe I'll try it again. Just freestyling it a bit more. I've got slightly tired legs if I'm being honest about it. So I think I've done enough hills up and down the Ridgeway a few times, up and down a few of those Chiltern hills, and just going to take it easy, cruise back home, cup of coffee, and then on with the rest of the day. Hope you enjoyed it.